This week on Full Circle Florida, inflation, immigration, and the reality check for the president. This week, inflation went up again as the CEO of Ford warns President Trump's trade war is going to, quote, blow a hole in the auto industry. Also this week, even some Republican members of Congress now pushing back against the Trump administration's aggressive spending cuts and tariffs that threaten to hit the home front in their congressional district. Is the president over leveraging his position of power, or is this exactly what voters signed up for? We'll debate and discuss. Plus, Capitol compromised the immigration deal in Tallahassee. So the question, will lawmakers now start focusing on your cost of living issues? Forrest Sauders with new reporting. And President Trump's court battles with the national media. Does it change how reporters cover the White House? This week, my deep conversation with legal expert Jeremy Rosenthal. Welcome into Full Circle Florida. Let's get right to our Capitol reporter Forrest Sauders joining us from Tallahassee. Forrest, the GOP civil war seems to be over for now at the Capitol. Lawmakers appeasing the governor, passing this new immigration law during a special session just a few weeks before they were set to start anyway in March. So what was the urgent rush to get immigration reform done first, as opposed to the cost of living issues that impact so many Floridians and the Republican leaders themselves have promised that they're going to focus on in the regular session?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what the governor would say in this question, he would say, well, I wanted all of it, right? Because he kind of did. He wanted it both ways. He wanted immigration reform, but originally when he made the call, he also had condo reform, he had ballot petition reform, he had hurricane relief, all of that coupled up. But as time went on and this debate sort of raged over immigration, that became the sole focus. And largely, I mean, you can only do so much in a few days' time. And we realized pretty quick back in January 13th when he initially made that call for special session that we weren't going to see all of that stuff get done, because he told us we didn't have a deal yet with legislative leaders about what to do on condos specifically. But come to find out, it was actually everything. He was just making sort of a Hail Mary play here to see if he could get lawmakers to come back and actually address these issues. To get to your point, which is immigration, why the rush? Well, that depends on who you ask, right? If you go to the governor's allies, they will tell you they wanted to move as fast as possible because they didn't want to have a Laken Riley situation here. They didn't want to have some kind of crime that they could have prevented if they had passed these policies sooner. They wanted to help bolster the federal level, right? Because you've got the Trump administration coming in, promising all these mass deportations, writing these executive orders. They want to do everything that they could as fast as they could to supplement that effort, because they got a mandate from voters. If you go to the legislature, they'll say it's premature, it's a big complicated issue, we need to take our time. And now we find ourselves in a position where after a month of back and forth, infighting, and even some really bitter personal attacks, they got something done. And the question is it going to help? Well, Republicans call it a victory. Democrats say it was a waste of time. We should have been focused on affordability, because that's really what voters want, Paul.
Well, and they'll certainly have a chance to do that, at least in theory, during the regular session. Forrest Sauders from Tallahassee, as always, thank you. Staying on the topic of illegal immigration, the crackdown and how the deportations could cause a labor shortage impacting seniors and their families. Here's my conversation this week with the CEO of Cambridge Caregivers, Adam Lampert. How do you think President Trump's immigration crackdown could create a labor shortage, especially if it drags on beyond just a few months?
So what happens when you have a shock to the system, like the threat of mass deportation, or in fact, mass deportation, is that people will, on the one hand, self-deport. You've probably been reading some about this, where they'll just leave. They'll say, I've had enough, and they leave. You may have ICE going around and deporting people. And so imagine that in the invisible part of the market, 1,000 staff are displaced. Well, that is the labor shortage right there. But the impact to me is that all those people that were having service need service now. How do they get service? They're going to come and proposition my staff, which means my staff are going to leave unless I pay more money. And so we know historically, because we had a shock in the form of the pandemic, that we're going to pay more money to maintain staff. And we know that created a 30% increase in the cost of staff at that time. So it's real. So the fact is that if there is a shock to the system, if people do in fact leave, that is going to not only cause a labor shortage, but also it's going to be very inflationary for our customers.
Is this immediate, or will this take months and perhaps the lingering effect beyond a year for it to actually show up?
My expectation is that we're going to weather this storm. One thing to recognize is that Donald Trump is a businessman also, and he's in the hospitality industry. He hires a lot of immigrants. There are a lot of people in his hotels that are running that business for him. So my sense is that calmer heads are going to prevail. I recognize that people are being displaced today and being deported, but I think that that once the quote unquote criminals are taken out of the system, that he is going to be reluctant to cut into the muscle of our economy. So I'm optimistic and feel like calmer heads will prevail.
Right. I mean, the question is how much pain and how much gain and how long is it going to take? When we talk about solutions, though, because I know when you're getting the news of these policy changes that have been coming very rapidly from the White House, even though it was talked about on the campaign trail, it's being implemented in real time as we sit here and talk today. What do you see as some of the out-of-box solutions that you're thinking about in your industry, which is an industry that is widespread and has a very intimate relationship? Anyone who has elder parents, I mean, we had to deal with this in my family, knows that it can be a very vulnerable time.
Well, first of all, when I think of solutions, what I realize is that we don't have really a mechanism. Our immigration policy is failing us. And immigration policy is labor policy. I'll explain it this way. When I talk to friends and I try to explain what's going on, I let them think about the highway that runs through the middle of your city. And cars are going 70 miles an hour along that highway. And a friend of yours mentions that, the law in the books for 100 years is that the speed limit is 40 miles an hour. So now all of a sudden, everybody on that highway is a lawbreaker. And the people who are rule followers are saying, well, we need to hire more police and we need to write more tickets. But the rational people take a look and they go, just a minute. The speed limit doesn't need to be 40 miles an hour. It needs to be 70 miles an hour. Look at the people that are moving products, that are moving goods, that are going to work. It needs to be 70 miles an hour. And so that is how the immigration policy and programs are today.
Yeah, I guess the question is, do you do all these solutions sort of the medicine at once, or do you phase it in over time, or do you do it cold turkey? That is, those are the decisions that are being made as we speak. Adam Lampert, thank you for your insight. Appreciate it, sir. Next on Full Circle Florida, the good news and the bad news for President Trump and what it means for you. Welcome back to Full Circle Florida. Dr. Susan MacManus joining us right now. All right, good news for President Trump this week. This poll came out showing that his approval rating's at 53%. 70% approve of how he is handling his promises that he's delivering. 59% approve of how he's handling immigration. What does this reveal about his second term?
Obviously, his experience taught him, look, you've got to hit the ground running. You've got to have good staff in place. You've got to have a pretty good idea of what do you want to tackle first. And secondly, you also have to be aware that Congress is not always behind you, and you have to be aware of also that everything is turning to the courts.
He's a veteran this time around. He knows the deal. Bad news, economic data shows inflation still going up. Egg prices are way up, obviously because of the bird flu, but how much longer can he blame that on Biden?
The next report out will be all his. The first one that just came out this year, 20 days of it, Biden was still in office. The public has short patience after a big promise to recover in terms of the economy, so we shall see.
The meter's always running. All right, this week, hedge fund manager Ken Griffin, the founder of Citadel, he warned Trump's tariff policies pose a risk to the economy, and I'm quoting here, he said the damage has already been done. He says it sends a message that we, I guess, the world can't depend upon America as a trading partner. The CEO of Ford put it more bluntly, saying the tariffs would, quote, blow a hole in the U.S. auto industry. Is Trump writing checks he can't cash?
We don't know, and the whole tariff issue is one that's very divisive. If you just look at what people think about it, the voters, they're very split on whether it's a good or bad thing. They're very split on whether it would be okay if it were creating jobs or the economy would improve. But a sizable portion, about a fourth of Americans, don't really know what they think about tariffs. But the business community has strong feelings, the public less so.
Yeah, and it's one of those where it would seem to me that you can't cry wolf on this. I'm talking about President Trump. You actually have to be willing to use him at some point. So when does it become a negotiating tactic and something that we're all going to have to pay the price on in order to get whatever he wants out?
Well, now the big buzzword is reciprocal tariffs.
Yeah.
All right, you put one on us, we'll put one on you. That's
the
kind of
trade
where
war,
we're at right now.
All right, hang with me. Next here on Full Circle Florida, all the president's lawyers, the media lawsuits, and how it impacts holding the president accountable. Welcome back to Full Circle Florida. President Trump is getting bolder when it comes to using the court system to go after his media critics. I had a conversation this week with legal expert Jeremy Rosenthal about the fear factor of holding a president accountable if he sues.
Stand by, rolling on camera one.
Well, Jeremy, always great having you on for insight into the issues of our time. So let's talk about President Trump. He is getting bolder about using the courts against the media. Is that a legitimate way of holding powerful corporate media companies accountable for the accuracy and the fairness of their reporting, or is it a heavy-handed approach that threatens democracy?
It's legitimate if you have a case, but it's very, very hard to bring a case like this, especially when you're a public figure. What you see here is what has been coined by a lot of folks in the media as lawfare. And that's traditionally media that's favorable to Donald Trump. That's what he characterized a lot of the attacks on him. And what he is doing is he's using the courts as tools to essentially go after people who or media outlets that he doesn't necessarily like. Now, when we talk about a defamation case, you have to keep in mind that you have to have a communication that is made outward to a third party, which is what the media does all day, every day. That communication, number one, has to be false. And when you're a celebrity or a public figure, it has to be done with what's called actual malice, which means that you actually have to be trying to hurt that figure, which is very, very difficult to do. And if that's not enough, you have to have what's called damages. You have to be able to show the court, well, here is the monetary figure that I am out for losing. So a lot of the lawsuits that Donald Trump has brought, one in particular against CBS in Amarillo in federal court, alleges that CBS was trying to cost him the 2024 election. Now that Trump has won that election, he obviously doesn't have the same set of damages. So a lot of these cases are very troubling.
Yeah, a movie fan here. If you want to look at a good journalism movie, Absence of Malice, Paul Newman, Sally Field talks about some of what you're talking about. But, no one needs to be reminded, or maybe they do, the state of the media right now in a peculiar financial state. And the question being, is President Trump leveraging his power and sort of exploiting the financial weakness right now of a media that is very much changing? Do media outlets have the money to keep battling President Trump in court? And he could also do this as a private citizen when he's out of office as well.
That's right. And look, there's a saying that we talk about in law, in the legal field. Lawyers will tell you, I'll give you as much justice as you can afford. ABC News, Meta, who's recently also settled with Donald Trump, CBS, they hire lawyers. Those lawyers they're not going to be free. And that's going to be a big cost to battle this type of person. Also, when you're litigating in court, what you're looking for in a lot of instances, as you've sort of alluded to, are what you would call pressure points. A pressure point for a media organization is going to be their bottom line. It's going to be their wallet. It's going to be their checkbook. When you are asking somebody, when you're asking your lawyer, well, on the other side, what's their pressure point, right? Donald Trump has proven to be somebody who has no problems taking the Fifth Amendment for the entire deposition, and then his ratings go up, his approval goes up. So he's a person who's really not intimidated by the courtroom. He's a person that doesn't fear it because he's really been through the ringer on that side. But again, what he's doing is sort of getting media outlets to second guess their reporting and their coverage based not on the free market, based not on, well, are your ratings going to go up or down, but based essentially at bayonet point, right? He's got a lawsuit which is asking a federal judge or a federal court, which is the government, to punish certain things that were said, to punish certain reports. So that's a very, very different outlook, and it's an absolutely revolutionary dynamic which we've never seen before.
Well, you wonder how this translates into actual coverage, how it might be changing how the national media covers the Trump White House. We've already seen major institutions being sort of kicked out of their comfort zone or their actual physical place in the press room in the White House, and being replaced by some of these non-traditional media outlets. But beyond that, how is it making the national media, which you could argue, if they are biased, they're biased against whoever's in power, be they Democrat or Republican. I know some people might take exception to that given the current political climate, but the questions are always pointed at whoever has the power and trying to hold them accountable. And it is President Trump right now who's in power, but are they less now, are they more reluctant to investigate certain things, look into certain things, publish certain things because they could be a target of a lawsuit?
The Carpenter's rule says you measure twice and cut once. And that's what we ought to have from our media, and that's what we ought to expect from our media. But is that because of the free market? Is that because responsible journalism ought to be consumed more by people? Do people trust you more if you're honest, if you tell the truth, or you level with them? Or are we going to moderate our content because we don't want to get sued? One is the free market capitalist principles. The other is sort of governmental restraint. I think Donald Trump would argue and say, look, I just want the media to be fair to me and to be accountable. But again, we have this really amazing dynamic of having somebody with a really big war chest that can use that war chest to try to intimidate and to try to manipulate, if you will, or at least moderate some of the content that could be negative towards him in the public realm. So when we sort of put all those things together, it really is a first and maybe in American history an only of its kind dynamic. But to your point, I certainly do think that news outlets, they don't want to write a $15 million check like ABC did. They don't want to write a $12 million check like Meta did. So they're going to obey the Carpenter's rule, measure twice, cut once. But are they doing that again because of fear of the bayonet? That's the real question.
Yeah, the stakes for being fair and balanced, and however you perceive that to be, have never been higher. Jeremy Rosenthal, thank you for your insight. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul.
Next on Full Circle Florida, our final thoughts. Welcome back to Full Circle Florida. Let's get to our final thoughts and my impression of this week, Susan. Managing expectations in Congress, Republican lawmakers starting to push back, if not a little quietly, about certain aspects of Trump's policies. Senator Katie Britt, Republican from Alabama, obviously a red state, pushing back on the administration's funding reductions under the National Institutes of Health because the University of Alabama at Birmingham gets a lot of that money. Her state, a major recipient of it. Susan Collins of Maine speaking out. Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana. So, they're all on board with Trump during the campaign when he's making these promises, but when he actually follows through, they get motion sickness. What do you think of that?
Well, because all of the House members are up for re-election next year, the midterm election, and a certain number of senators are also up. And when they've run, or gonna run, they run on issues that they promised to bring the bacon home, so to speak.
Right.
And obviously, it's a great idea to support these general cuts, but just not mine. It's kind of like the do as I say, not as I do thing.
Well, so this really is the intersection of the executive branch and the legislative branch and the conflict of interest that's there right now.
And the checks and balances in the system, absolutely.
All right. Another week down. Susan, thanks for being with us, and thank you for watching us here on Full Circle Florida. We hope you'll join us again here next week. Make sure to add our free 24/7 streaming news channel, ABC Action News Plus. We'll see you again next week. Have a good one.